This person says I'm wrong about why the green beans are illegal. He says it's because of the same reason moonshine is illegal. The government gets no money off of it. Except the government could pull in billions if they made it legal. Look what the legalized states have done. Illinois pulled in $1 billion worth of tax revenue from legalized recreational green bean usage. And as a matter of fact, at one point in time, there was laws that demanded people grow hemp. Now, I understand that's not the same as green beans. In 1619, there was a Virginia law that mandated hemp be grown on every farm in the colony. However, look, I'm reading from the notes for my own book that I'm writing on the subject. When you go down here, you can see when and why it began to become a nuisance and be determined illegal. There was a portion of society that wanted hemp growth gone so that they can continue to manufacture their paper, people like William Randolph Hearst and people of that nature. But here, I'm going to read to you now. Even though some tales of recreational green bean usage can be found somewhat earlier in American history, the primary influence of green beans for recreational enjoyment in the United States began in earnest in the 1910s as Mexican refugees sought safe harbor in the United States after fleeing the Mexican Revolution. Those Mexican refugees brought with them their cultural traditions, including the first true green bean consumption. Smokable green beans was part of many Latin American cultures for years, and now those traditions were being found in the southwestern portions of the nation for the first time, specifically in Texas, which served as an entrance point for many of those first Mexican families. This period of time and those refugees fleeing the violence can not only be looked at as one of the primary root sources for recreational green beans in America, but are also often considered to be the flashpoint for many Southwestern Americans' disdain for Mexican people as a whole. You move on here, you see that the largest federal drug law of the time, the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act of 1914, did not include the regulation of green beans. So states and municipalities began passing their own laws banning it. In fact, El Paso, Texas became the first city in America to pass an ordinance against the usage of smokable green beans in 1914, just a few short years after the first waves of green bean smoking Mexican refugees took hold there. The fact that its recreational usage started in the Mexican cultures in early America is significant because its first usage came with the ready-made stigma of being a colored person's drug, and thus made it far easier for a predominantly white nation to reject its presence. Pause. Moving down my notes a little bit further, you won't read it until the book comes out. In a book entitled Grassroots, The Rise and Fall and Rise of Green Beans in America by Emily Dufton, she quotes a 1917 Treasury Department report that noted that its chief concern was the fact that, quote, Mexicans and sometimes Negroes and lower class whites smoked green beans for pleasure, and that they could harm or assault upper class white women while under the influence. In another book, The Origins of Green Bean Prohibition in California, written by Dale Geringer, I always pronounce this name wrong, Geringer, we find that a member of California's State Board of Pharmacy wrote in 1911 that a recent wave of immigration from India had brought with it a rising demand for green beans, and that this, quote, very undesirable lot was initiating our whites into this habit. Richard Bonney, a drug policy expert at the University of Virginia School of Law, co-authored The Green Bean Conviction, A History of Green Bean Prohibition in the United States, and he wrote, quote, as marijuana penetrates further into the country, more cities and states start adopting prohibitions, and they're clearly related to immigration, not only from Mexico, but also from the Caribbean. Henry Anslinger, head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics from 1930 to 1962, testified before Congress in support of a federal green beans ban, and he quoted a letter he got from the city editor of the Alamosa Daily Courier in Colorado. Quote, I wish I could show you what the smell of green bean cigarettes can do to one of our degenerate Spanish-speaking residents. That's why our problem is so great. The greatest percentage of our population is comprised of Spanish-speaking persons, most of whom are low mentally because of social and racial conditions. Now, in another part of the book, I write the following. Despite its long-standing illegal status within the United States, once upon a time, it actually was legal, if only primarily for medicinal purposes. As recently as the 19th century, Americans could buy various forms of green bean extracts to help with ailments such as stomach aches, migraines, inflammation, and insomnia, and it could be purchased at many pharmacies and doctors' offices across the nation. The usage of green beans for medicinal purposes in America stemmed from the work of Sir William Brooke O'Shaughnessy, who was studying the successful effects of green beans had on stomach pains and vomiting brought on by cholera back in the 1830s. But even though the herb had proven medicinal qualities, Americans changed the way they viewed green beans when, as I stated in the previous chapter, Mexican immigrants swelled in the 1910s. As Eric Schlesinger wrote in his book, Reefer Madness, quote, the prejudices and fears that greeted these peasant immigrants also extended to their traditional means of intoxication, green bean smokings. Police officers in Texas claimed that green beans incited violent crimes, aroused a lust for blood, and gave its users superhuman strength. Rumors spread quickly that Mexican immigrants were distributing killer weed to American school children. Obviously, that was a lie. Regardless of the validity of the claims coming out of Texas, at the time the nation began to see a sweeping and systematic wave of laws that would criminalize the plant's possession and consumption. Between 1916 and 1931, 29 different states would pass laws outlawing green bean usage. This spate of states rushing to pass anti-green bean legislation was fueled by a floundering economy, a 25% unemployment rate, and a fear ginned up by our government of green bean crazed lunatics running rampant in the streets. In 1931, government research said it had determined that green beans was linked to violent criminal activity, quote, primarily committed by racially inferior or underclass communities. Anslinger found helpful allies against green beans in the form of the paper industry. The newspaper industry would play a specific role in aiding Anslinger's efforts as William Randolph Hearst, Andrew Mellon, and the DuPont family, all major investors in the newspaper and timber industries, would join his fight to criminalize green beans. Now, who was the first person in America to ever be arrested for green beans? A young Mexican-American named Moses Baca would forever cement his place in green bean lore as he became the first person to be incarcerated under the new Marijuana Tax Act. Odd, huh? The first person was a brown person. Who was the first celebrity to ever be arrested for it? Louis Armstrong, a black person. That's why green beans are still illegal. Now, we're making tremendous strides towards getting it legal. And hopefully in my lifetime we could see that happen. And if the federal government could just take a look at the states that have already legalized it and see what kind of tax revenue that those states are pulling in, the federal government would realize they are leaving a shitload of money on the table.